Okay, so today we're going to do something a little bit different. A new topic. We're going to look at Mr. Computer. We use computers all the time, but very few people actually understand what's inside and how they work and why they're special. So, what I'm going to do is go over the basic parts and what they do and a little bit of the history so you guys have an understanding of what this is. So, I've been fortunate to be alive during most of the life of the computer. I started when I was like 15, 16, writing programs for what back then was a computer that today you would laugh at. My cell phone has 100 times more power than the computer I started on. So let's talk about what that is. What's inside the box? All computers have the same basic ingredients, no matter what they look like, whether it's a phone, a laptop, a PC, or a great big thing in some office somewhere. They're all the same basic components. Okay? So, inside Mr. Computer, you have a brain, you have memory, you have I/O, and you have storage. These are the four basic pieces. Okay? The brain, we're going to talk about all four of these, and you'll have a feeling for how they're different on different things. The brain is something we call a CPU. That stands for Central Processing Unit. CPU, Central Processing Unit. This is the piece inside the computer that does what we call thinking. It doesn't really think like you and me. It's doing math is what it's doing. It's doing math in order. And we'll talk about how these work in a bit. I want to give you the high-level picture first. So the CPU is basically doing math. There's our old friend, Mr. Math. He's everywhere. You can't live without math. Everything that happens inside the computer is based on math. I don't know how far into the math we're going to get, but we'll touch on it so you have an understanding of why do we call that math. When you're watching a video on TV, on your laptop, you're doing math. That's what it is. It's all math. Okay, so there's the CPU, the brain. There is also memory. There's multiple types of memory, commonly referred to RAM, ROM, PROM, EEPROM, all different types of memory. The most common one you would see is RAM. This is all different ways of storing things. Basically, it's storing the math, how to do the math. What you store in here, in the center of this is a program. The program is stored in memory and handed to the CPU in order to do things. That's where the math lives, is inside the program. The program says, do this, 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 this. Those instructions are stored over here in memory. When you turn the computer on, they get sucked out of memory and get sent up to the CPU, and boom, it starts doing things. Okay? The difference between these is something called volatility. Volatility is a general word that refers to how permanent something is. Something very volatile means it's not permanent. RAM is very volatile. It only exists, it only remembers while the power is turned on. When you turn the power off, it goes back to scratch. Everything that was there is gone. ROM is non-volatile memory. It stays forever. It's programmed one time, you can never change it, and it's there for the life of the chip. PROM is programmable read-only memory. These stand for random access memory, read-only memory, programmable read-only memory, and erasable programmable read-only memory. It's all different ways of building memory. They all do the same thing. Okay? They all just store the math that you're going to hand to the CPU. Then you have I/O. I/O is things like a keyboard, a monitor, a screen. All the ways that the computer talks to you. It could be sound. The I/O is where this program sends stuff to talk to you, communicate with you. It's what you see on the screen. It's typing on the keyboard, telling it what you want to do, writing a letter, going on a website, whatever. This I/O stands for input, output. And it is any devices where the computer talks to you. Then we have long-term storage. This is where the program stores things for long term. Anything, remember over here, this is about volatility. This stuff tends to go away, or you can't, there's two basic things. This is you can store anything you want in it, but it goes away as soon as you turn it off. So you write a letter, you turn it off, boom, your letter's gone. So that doesn't do much good. This, you can only write a letter one time, and you can never change it. If you make a typo, oh well. It's stored like that because it's only write one time. This you can write multiple times, but you can never change it. Now, so there's limitations here. So this is not considered long-term storage. If you write a letter, you want to put it somewhere where it's going to stay. You created it, and you want to store it away. You want to be able to change it. All that kind of stuff happens over here. This is things like disk drives. Cloud storage, which is a whole new thing. CD-ROMs. In my day, it was cassette tapes, and there's all different ways of doing it. But basically, this refers to ways where the program is going to send things for long-term storage that you have created. So when you take those four things together, now all of a sudden you have a very useful device. You can store what needs to happen and working stuff over here. You can send it to the CPU, and technically the CPU is sending this stuff out. So it's communicating all through the computer, going back and forth really fast. This is how it interacts with you, and this is where you put stuff for long-term storage when you want to turn it off. So there's a high-level picture of what a computer is. It's all those devices all hooked together in the right way. When you buy a computer, you choose how you want these things to be. If you're buying like a laptop or a desktop, you choose how fast do I want my CPU. That's what you're choosing. How fast do I want it to be? Over here, you're choosing how big do you want your thinking memory to be, where the program lives and works. Here, you're choosing how, let's call it accurate. How good do you want the sound to be? How nice do you want the keyboard to feel? How good, how many colors can the monitor do? You're choosing all the stuff about how accurate it is going in and out to you. Here, you're choosing how fast and how big. So you have choices, because these are separate pieces, and when you're building a computer, you can make these be anything you want. Okay? So there's the high-level view. Now let's talk about each one of these a little bit. But first I'd like to go into a little bit of a history. Today, I don't have my phone with me. Is there a phone over here? So This little device, the cell phone, is absolutely amazing because to do what this thing could do when I was your age would take a machine as big as this entire room, and now you carry it around in your hand. That's how much this has changed just in my lifetime. Back in the very beginning, the first computers were nothing but relays. You guys have this picture? I'm going to have to erase this in order to go to the next step. Because there's something that's very important to me. Most of the kids that come out of colleges right now don't have this. And I think this is one of the most important concepts to have. The understanding of what's going on inside. Because if you don't understand what's going on inside and you choose to do something in the computer world, then you're not going to do it efficiently because you don't know what you're doing inside. So here's where this story went. Originally, computer was nothing but a bunch of relays. And a relay is nothing but an on-off device. Remember we talked about electricity. A relay is nothing but an on-off device that you put power to it, it turns on. You take away power, it turns off. That's it. That's all it can do. That is where computers started. Step one. Relays. You know the old term, there's a bug in my program, there's a bug in my computer? That's very real. Because in the first computers that were ever built, these are mechanical devices. Little pieces move back and forth to make contact. Remember we talked about electricity needing conducting, touching, metal touching each other? Well, that's what this is. It's two pieces of metal that touch or don't touch. What happens if you get a bug in between?
It won't touch.
It won't touch. So a bug, in the traditional sense, to a programmer means there's an actual insect that crawled inside my relay, and now my relay doesn't work, and I'm going to take a little can of air and a broom, and I'm going to sweep the bugs out. That's where the term came from. They were real things. Flies would get in, and when the relay closed, it grabbed their wings, and now it no longer works, and your computer's down. It's actual bugs. They went from here to semiconductors. Semiconductors, they used to be called solid state because it was a huge improvement. Here, you're at the mercy of the insects, the dust in the air, everything. And the little contacts would wear out because they're actually moving. Semiconductors is basically a form of silicon that some bright guy figured out would work like a relay. It's a little piece of plastic, tiny. Actually, there's a step in between here I skipped. Man. Okay, so that's step 3. Step 2 is tubes. Okay? Tubes were, it's a form of a relay that had no movement, but did have heat. Okay? So first you had the relays that physically move back and forth. Then you had, this was an actual glass tube. And inside of it was this apparatus where it would kind of shoot electricity across the air to a heated plate, and it would work like a relay to turn electricity on and off. But it has to be up to the right temperature. Old TVs, radios were all built like this. The first electronic stuff were built like this. They weren't called electronics in those days. And they had to warm up. So you turn your thing on and you walk away, and if it's wintertime, you come back in 2 minutes and it starts to heat up and then it starts working. Because it's based on heat. Instead of movement, it's based on heat. But it's big things. My dad, in his store, we used to sell tubes. We had a tube checker that would check whether they're good or not. Because they would still wear out over time. And they were big things. Some of them were the size of your hand. really high powerful tubes would be the size of your head. Some, like I worked on a radio station once that had tubes, and it could be the size of you. Literally, one tube the size of you that would do stuff. But back to computers. So they went from relays to tubes. And that was an improvement because now it's sealed. Bugs are no longer a problem. Dust is no longer a problem. But they're slow. They make a huge amount of heat. It's like a heater, literally. The electricity was turned into heat in order to do things. So then they invented semiconductors, which is little tiny, relatively tiny pieces of silicon that work just like these things. You put electricity to it, and it would work like a switch inside where the other electricity would turn on or off. So all of this is still based on or off. This stays constant all the way down. At the lowest level, everything inside the computer is on or off. Then, the fourth step was what was called ICs, or integrated circuit. Most abbreviations, you need to learn it because the abbreviation tells you what it is. So the next improvement was integrated circuits. That is where they take a whole bunch of these things, stuff it into a piece of silicon, and it does more stuff. This step right here was the actual birth of usable computers. I say usable because in these worlds, it took too many pieces to do something. When I was like, I don't know, 15, 16, I built a robot. And that robot had the ability to go forward, backward, turn left or right. And the amount of electronics it took to build that at this stage was, it was a bunch of circuit boards about this tall. It was in a 5-gallon bucket. And the whole thing was full of boards that I hand wired all these little pieces together. It must have been, I don't know, 500 pieces there. Now, if you open up this cell phone, there's one integrated circuit inside of here that has 1,000,000 times more power than that entire robot that I built. What they've done over the years is squeeze more and more into this. So it has more and more capabilities. Where here, there's one transistor, one piece. Here, there might be 1 billion. That's how much things have changed in my lifetime. So when I was a kid and I was building something, I would take each one individually and insert it and solder it together and figure out how to hook it up. Now you take an IC that has 1 billion transistors inside of it, and you stick power to it, and boom, it becomes alive, and it does things. That's because they've taken the circuit that I was building by hand and stuffed it all integrated together into one piece of silicon. I can show you what an integrated circuit looks like as opposed to a transistor, because we just took some out. Here they are. This is really interesting. This is the control board out of our sauna that I just removed. And here, these long black things are integrated circuits. That's this stage. These big black things is a single relay. That's this stage. They're still useful, but you don't use them for computers anymore. Now they're just used to control electricity. A transistor is this little tiny box over here, this little black thing. That is one. This is probably about 10,000 of those. So when you're looking at this, you can see all the stages. This big thing here is multiple transistors. But this little bitty guy, like this little guy right in the middle, little black guy, that's one transistor. Inside of here is probably 1,000 of those. Here I just can pass that here and you can't hurt it. It's toast. So on a circuit board like that, you see all of these things except tubes. Tubes are gone. You will not see a tube anywhere nowadays on anything built because they're very inefficient. Everything is semiconductors and relays. So that gives you a feel for how things have changed. And this is just, I'm only 50 years old, and I've seen this over the last 40 years. Now here's why this is important. Because at the very lowest level, a computer is based on math. A CPU, our central processing unit, is at step number 4. You cannot have a central processing unit unless you have an integrated circuit, because it would take 1 million of these to make this. So if you had a board that size with 1 million of those the size of that little one, it would be the size of this table. It's not practical. So before this was invented, computers as we know them were not practical. A computer was a room the size of this kitchen you'd walk into, and you look around and this whole thing is full of chips and things. That's a computer. So what made computers practical is this right here. But the interesting thing is, this is all the evolution of how it is built. One thing has never changed. Since these days right here, one thing remains constant. What it does. What a computer chip does at this level is exactly the same as these relays up here. And this is the key to if you want to go in the computer industry, that's the key, is understanding what it does. Because that's never changed. A computer is a computer, and it's no different. So, let's touch on that. How much time do we have left? 5 minutes. Let's touch on what it does. And this is where the math comes in. This is the fun. Okay, think about a relay. Relay has 2 states. Has 2 states. What are they? On and off. On and off. And that's it. Believe it or not, when you're watching a video on the laptop, what you're watching is billions and billions of on and offs every second. That's it. Because here's where I started. My first computer that I was building from scratch looked like this. I'm going to need to draw it bigger. I like this example because it kind of gives you a picture for what we're talking about. My first computer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. This was my first computer. This row is little LED lights, or little lights. They weren't even LEDs back then. That's a whole other story. These were little lights. These guys are little switches. There's 8 lights and 8 switches. There's a reason for that. Then there's 2 other buttons. There's a run button, there's a store button. This is getting interesting now, huh? So what you would do to write a program literally is this. You would set these up in some order and hit store. What do you think just happened? Think about that picture I had on the board. This is input output. What is this doing? Think about the picture. What was on this side?
Storage.
Storage. Thinking area. Not long-term storage, short-term storage. So what you would do is set a number and store in memory. One number. That number is represented by a bunch of on and offs. And you'd store it in memory. You do this 100 times. And then you hit run a run would do? It would step through these 100 things. Because every one of these numbers, a number equals an instruction. Okay? So inside in the CPU, it's built so that it knows instruction 1 means add. Instruction 2 means subtract. Instruction 3 means move. 4 means output. This is called instruction set. This is pre-programmed in what's called, in the way that the computer's built. I'm not going to go much detail there. So that the CPU knows when I see this number, I'm going to add something. When I see this number, I'm going to subtract something. So what I'm doing is saying, first, I want to do my program. First, I want to do number 3. I want to move something from here to here. Then I want to do number 2, which means I want to subtract. Then I'm going to do number 4. I'm going to output the answer. This is a program. Move, subtract, output. It's instructions stored in order inside of the memory that you can hit run, and the CPU will do what you ask it to do. And fundamentally, this is exactly what programmers do today, just at a much higher level. But it is really that simple. It's all based on stored instructions, which represent math. Most of these are math things. And you're storing them in memory one at a time. Now, instead of sitting here and plugging all these in, you type on the keyboard and say, okay, first move this and then subtract this and output that. Or you go to what's called a higher level language and say, do X. And one command today represents all those 3 commands that were back then. But at the fundamental level, at the very lowest level of thinking, even today, when you write a single instruction that could represent 1,000,000 of these, the CPU is doing 1,000,000 of those. Because the CPU is fundamentally the same as it was when it was first invented. It has never changed, only its ability. Where back then, in my day, this may be able to do 100 per second, maybe, on a good day, with the right power, and cool. Now, we have the equivalent of our CPUs now running gigahertz. So a gigahertz is 1 billion. That's how much it's changed. It's doing the same thing. It's doing these in order, these 3 steps. But now, today, I just say, do X, and it can do it 1 billion times a second instead of 100. Fundamentally, it's the same thing. You're doing math. You're telling it what order to do the math, and it's just doing it really fast. And that's, at a high level, the story of computers. Okay? That's it for today. Later, we'll go back and go a little bit deeper.